Most people think the hardest part of the LSAT is the logical reasoning section, but reading comp is actually the real silent killer. It looks harmless because you've been reading your whole life, but on the LSAT, it's a trap. If you've ever read a whole passage and realized you remember nothing, if you've ever guessed on 5 questions in a row because they all sounded kind of right, you're not alone. And no, the solution is not to do 50 more passages and hope you get better over time. That is a total waste of time. This section is completely beatable once you change how you approach it. And so today I'm going to show you how. The reason smart students still fail at reading comp is not because they can't read, it's because they're using the wrong mental model. They read reading comp passages the same way they read for school, slowly, carefully, trying to understand every single detail. And that's exactly how the LSAT beats you. LSAT reading comp is not absorbing information. It's about detecting structure. They're asking you, can you determine the author's real agenda? Can you figure out who's arguing over what? And can you quickly ignore what doesn't matter? If you treat it like an open book history quiz, you're gonna lose. So today I'm going to show you the system I teach my students instead. First, you've got to recognize that the author of the passage is a lawyer in disguise. You've got to reframe how you read the passages. That shift alone can take you from being confused and passive to being confident and in control. But here's the mindset that you must adopt. Every reading comp passage is an argument, not a lecture, not an encyclopedia entry, and not a Wikipedia article. It's an argument, and that means the person writing it, the author, isn't just giving you facts. They're trying to persuade you. It's subtle, it's strategic, and often through structure, not emotion. You might think to yourself, that can't be true because the passage is often just describing a scientific theory, or it's listing 2 sides of a historical debate. That might be true, but even then, the way they present that information tells you where the author stands. And that's what the LSAT wants you to find. Most students miss this because they're reading like students. They're trying to understand and memorize everything. But the LSAT doesn't care how much you remember. It cares how well you can ID the main argument, the structure of that argument, and the author's point of view. So here's how to actually do this while you're reading. First, you want to look for the signals of structure, because every paragraph on the LSAT has a job, and your job is to spot what that job is. So if a paragraph opens with, some researchers believe, that's a clue that you're about to hear one particular viewpoint. If the next paragraph starts off with, however, critics argue, or, but this explanation fails to account for, that means you're getting a counterpoint. And a phrase like, this suggests, or therefore, is almost always the author stepping in to share their opinion. So these signal words are all giving you important indications of the structure. Now you also want to know the characters playing in every single passage, because nearly every passage includes some combination of the following 3: Scholar A, Scholar B, and the author. Scholar A is giving you one theory, Scholar B is giving you an opposing view or a refinement of that first view, then the author has their own take as well that either aligns with Scholar A, Scholar B, both or neither. And your job is to figure out who believes what, who's being described objectively, and where, if anywhere, the author tips their hand or shares their opinion. Now, the author will often reveal their stance in a subtle way, through tone words like surprisingly, troubling, or elegant. They're rarely going to be in your face about it. Now, you also want to read against the author, and this is where we flip the switch. Most students are reading to better understand the author, but you're going to read to challenge the author. Ask yourself, if I had to argue against this, what would I say? Or what assumptions is the author making? Or what is the weakest link in their logic? This isn't because the LSAT will ask you to disagree. It's because that mindset, critical reading, is what allows you to see the argument as an argument and not as just more information. And that shift is huge, because once you train yourself to read this way, you're going to notice something wild. First, you don't need to reread as much, which is great. Second, you're going to retain more without even trying, also great. And third, you're going to finish faster and more confident with higher accuracy, which is of course the goal. And it's not because you just got better at reading, it's because you changed how your brain interacts with the text. And that's why I say the author is a lawyer in disguise, because they're making a case. And your job, as the test taker, is to read like a skeptical opposing counsel. You're not going to be impressed by fancy vocabulary words, and you're not getting distracted by the details. You're staying focused on the strategy. Once you do that, reading comp stops feeling like a fog of random facts and starts feeling like a debate that you know how to win. Now let's kill a myth that is ruining your reading comp score. Most students think that skimming is lazy or risky or something that you only do when you're out of time. So instead, they do that good student thing where they read every single word carefully, slowly, and painfully, and then they still forget everything by the time they hit the first question. If that sounds familiar, you're not alone. But the truth is that strategic skimming is what high scorers do, not to avoid doing the work, but to do it smarter and faster. Because on the LSAT, you don't need to understand or retain every single detail. You've got to understand the structure of the passage and where to find things if you need to. And that's what targeted or strategic skimming gives you. So let me walk you through it, and we'll talk about what you're actually looking for when you read. Now, let me be crystal clear. You are not reading to absorb facts. You are reading to build a mental roadmap. That means every single paragraph should trigger one key question in your mind. Namely, what role does this paragraph play in the overall argument? Is it background, a theory, a critique, or an author's opinion? That's all you need. So when you read, you're not trying to memorize, you're trying to label. And once you learn to label paragraphs by function, the test starts to feel way more manageable. Now, here's how I teach my students to read passages efficiently without losing comprehension. The first paragraph you want to, of course, read carefully because that's usually your setup. It gives you the topic, the context, and maybe even the author's thesis. You want to ask yourself, what is this passage about? What question or debate is being introduced? And does the author sound neutral, or do they already have a stance? Then, paragraphs 2 and beyond, you want to skim, but with purpose. And that's where most students either fall asleep or get lost in the weeds. Instead, you want to do this. You want to read the first 1 or 2 sentences of the paragraph and then pause. Ask yourself, what is this paragraph doing? If it introduces a new scholar, a new theory, or a new critique, you want to slow down and process. But if it's just listing more examples or adding elaboration, note it and move on. You're deciding here where to invest more of your attention, and you're not treating every sentence equally. This saves you time, energy, and most importantly, mental bandwidth to solve the questions. Have you ever had that moment where you finish the passage and realize you remember nothing of what you read? That is not a bad memory problem, that is a bad method problem. You were reading everything equally, and so the problem was your brain didn't know what to hold on to. However, when you use targeted skimming, you retain the structure of the argument, you know where to go back for details, and you stop second-guessing yourself during the questions. You're not reading less, but you're just reading smarter. Now here's a little secret. LSAT passages often front-load important information, like the author viewpoint, and they hide traps in the middle. For example, a second or third paragraph might present a view that sounds authoritative, but isn't the author's. And if you're reading passively, you'll assume that was the takeaway and then bomb the main point question. So remember, slow down when a new theory or critique shows up, and speed up when it's just evidence or elaboration. And always keep your eyes peeled for the author's real voice, often at the beginning or the end. And remember, strategic skimming is not optional if you want to score high. It's not cheating, it's not risky, it's the difference between struggling to remember every single word and walking into the questions with a clear mental map. The people scoring 170 and above are not just reading faster, they're also reading differently. And now you are too. Now let's talk about one of the most underrated reading comp tools out there. It's not fancy, it doesn't require hours of extra practice, and in fact, it takes less than 10 seconds to apply. But once you start using it, you'll wonder how you ever survived without it. I call it the passage skeleton. And no, this isn't some gimmicky hack. This is a serious cognitive upgrade. Because the real enemy in reading comp isn't the length of the passage, it's mental fatigue. Getting halfway through a passage and then forgetting what the hell you just read. So the passage skeleton kills that fatigue before it even starts. Let me show you how it works. The passage skeleton is a bare bones outline of the passage that you build as you read, either in your head or scribbled in shorthand on your scratch paper. You're not summarizing here, you are tagging purpose. So for example, in a science passage, you might have it as paragraph 1 is giving you background on whale song, paragraph 2 is the old theory on mating calls, paragraph 3 is the new theory with a territorial claim, and then paragraph 4 is where the author supports the new theory and gives evidence for it. That is it. You didn't write a whole essay, you didn't paraphrase every sentence, you just labeled what each paragraph does. And that tiny shift turns your brain from acting like a sponge, trying to soak up everything, into a scanner which helps you ID the structure fast. So let's talk about why this works. Your working memory is limited. Most people can only hold 4 to 7 chunks of information at once. So when you try to remember a giant blob of reading comp content, you overload. But if you collapse the passage into just 4 to 5 labeled chunks, and you know what each one represents, you've just made the entire passage digestible. You're not wasting energy rereading anymore, and you're not overwhelmed by walls of text. You're anchoring meaning as you go, and that saves time and improves accuracy, which makes it a rare win-win. And here's the best part. You don't need to pause and write a skeleton after the passage, but instead you build it while you read. After each paragraph, you just got to ask yourself, what job did that paragraph do? Then you either keep a mental map in your head, or you quickly jot down a couple of words on your scratch paper. And so, when you get a question about a particular paragraph, instead of having to reread the entire thing, you just glance at your notes, and boom, you've got your answer. That's time saved and confidence gained. Now here's the objection I always hear. What if I don't understand the topic? My answer? That doesn't matter. You don't need to know anything about constitutional theory or prehistoric cave paintings or whatever it is. You've just got to follow the structure. You've got to know who's talking, what's their opinion, and what is the author doing with it. The content could be about advanced economics or mushroom reproduction. It makes no difference at all. Because once you build the skeleton, the passage becomes easy to navigate. Now, I once worked with a student named Rachel. She was super sharp, already scoring high 160s, but reading comp was dragging her down. She was trying to remember every single fact and would read things constantly. And she, as a result, was exhausted halfway through the section. So we added just one thing to her strategy, passage skeletons. At first, she resisted, said it felt too simple, but within a week, her pacing improved and her confidence soared. So if you're tired of rereading, second-guessing, and feeling foggy halfway through the section, build that skeleton. Not later, not as a recap, but while you read. It's fast, it's light, and it'll carry you through the most confusing sections with both clarity and confidence, structure over memory every single time. Reading comp questions aren't random. They may look different, they may sound complicated, but under the hood, they're testing the same 5 things over and over. And once you know those 5 question types and how to handle each one, you'll stop getting tricked. You'll stop second guessing. You'll stop thinking, these all sound right, because here's the truth. Every reading comp question has a job. And when you learn to recognize the job, you know what to look for and what to ignore. The first big question type is the main point or primary purpose question. What it's really asking is, what's the point of the whole passage? It's not about just one paragraph, it's about the big picture. And so here's what you want to watch out for. The right answer usually mirrors the author's overall conclusion, but in different words. It's capturing all the major ideas, not just one piece, and it avoids extreme or super narrow phrasing. Common traps in these questions are answers that zoom in on a single example, or answers that name drop terms from the passage, but miss the main theme. Now, here's how to nail them. Before you even look at the answers, say out loud or in your head, the passage was mainly about what? And if your answer wouldn't make sense to explain the passage to a friend in just one sentence, it's probably too narrow. The second big question type is the author's attitude or tone. What these are really asking is, how does the author feel about the topic or the people mentioned in this passage? This is kind of a vibe check. You want to look out for adjectives here. They are everything. Words like unfortunately, significant, troubling, elegant, problematic, all give you an indication of the author's attitude or tone. The author might not explicitly say, I think, but they'll give away their stance in the tone that they use. Common traps for these are often confusing a neutral summary with the attitude. Another trap is overinterpreting the tone. Most reading comp tone is kind of subtle, so you don't want to go looking for passion where there isn't any. As for how to nail these, ask yourself, if the author had to summarize this topic over coffee with a friend, would they sound excited, annoyed, skeptical, or neutral? And so you want to use tone clues like however, despite, and clearly to zero in on the tone. The third big question type is specific detail questions. These are asking you, what did the passage say in this specific line or paragraph? This is the most open book type of reading comp question. Here, they're typically giving you a particular line reference or keyword to go back to, and so for these, of course, you do want to go back and reread that section of the passage. A big trap here is overly relying on your memory. Even if you feel like you remember the detail, you still want to double check it. You also don't want to misread the scope of the question. If they ask you what a scholar said, don't answer with what the author thinks. The author and the scholar are two different people. You've got to go back to the referenced section, reread a couple lines above and a couple lines below, then paraphrase it in your own words before looking at the answer choices. This reduces the chances that you'll be tricked by similar sounding wrong options. The fourth big question type is a function or purpose question. They're asking you here, why did the author include this particular paragraph or sentence or quote? These questions are all about the structure. They'll say things like serves to, in order to, or plays which one of the following roles. Your job here is to figure out what is the purpose of that particular part of the passage. Now, you don't want to confuse the content with the purpose. Just because a paragraph talks about a theory doesn't mean that its function was to support it. You also don't want to choose answers that describe what's in the paragraph instead of why it's there. So look at the sentence or paragraph in question in context. Ask yourself, is this introducing a new idea? Is it providing evidence? Is it contrasting a prior view? Or is it building the author's case? Now, the fifth big question type in reading comp is inference questions. These are really asking you, what does the passage imply, but not say directly or explicitly? This is all about reading between the lines, but not too far. Now, in these questions, the right answer is almost said, where you could even underline a phrase and say, this suggests that. The wrong answers will go beyond the passage or add in new information. Now, a common trap here is picking something that might sound reasonable, but isn't directly implied. You also don't want to go for bold claims over conservative ones. You want to stick to soft inferences. If it feels like a big leap, it probably is. Remember here that inference doesn't mean guess. It means to read logically, not creatively. Now, once you know those 5 big question types, you can spot them instantly and answer them like a pro. Instead of wasting time trying to understand the question or getting pulled into traps or rereading the answers hoping something feels right, you're now IDing the question type, applying the right framework, and scanning for the correct logic. You've now shifted from reactive to strategic. And when that happens, reading comp goes from, I hope I survive this, to, I know exactly what this question is doing, and I know how to beat it. Now, here's the truth about reading comp questions that most students don't want to hear. You don't always need to find the right answer right away, but you do need to be elite at spotting and eliminating wrong ones. Why? Because on most reading comp questions, there are at least 2 answers that feel kind of right. They both use keywords from the passage, they sound reasonable, and they seem close, but they're wrong. And if you don't have a system for spotting why they're wrong, you're going to waste time. You'll second guess yourself and change your answer back and forth, and you'll lose. Now let's fix that. High scorers don't pick the right answer immediately. They just eliminate the bad ones faster. First, you've got to know the 3 types of wrong answers. The first are extreme answers. These are your always, never, completely, the only, and entirely choices. They're bold, dramatic, and decisive, and they're usually wrong. because LSAT passages are rarely black and white. Most authors hedge. They'll say may, often, likely, or some scholars suggest. They qualify everything. So unless the passage itself uses extreme language, which is going to be pretty rare, you want to cross out extreme answers immediately. The second big category are half-true answers, and these are the sneakiest wrong answers on the test. They might start off great, and they reference the right section. They might reuse keywords, so you're going to be nodding your head, but then in the second half, they twist the meaning. They go too far, and they subtly shift the author's view, and that's what makes them dangerous. They might feel right, but they miss the intent. And so here's how to catch them. You've got to ask yourself, does this answer reflect what the author meant, or just what they mentioned? Just because an idea appears in the passage doesn't mean the author actually supports it, or that it was even the point. So when in doubt, check the intent, not just the content. The third big category are outside knowledge answers, and these are designed to trap smart people. You read the answer and think to yourself, oh yeah, that makes sense, or I learned that in class. But it's a trap, because it doesn't matter what you know in real life. It only matters what the passage says. If an answer makes a claim that wasn't clearly implied or stated in the text, even if it seems reasonable, eliminate it. The LSAT is not testing your prior education. It's testing whether you can stay inside the passage. So if you find yourself thinking, I could see how that would be true, that's a red flag. The test is not asking for creativity. You've got to stick to what is in the passage. Now, you've also got to make elimination an active process, not a passive one. Because here's what most people do. They read an answer, they say, I don't like it, and they skip to the next one. That is not good enough. You need to say why an answer is wrong actively. For every choice you eliminate, ask yourself, is this extreme? Is this twisting the meaning? Is this adding new info? When you force your brain to articulate why it's wrong, two things happen. One, you get faster at spotting patterns, and two, you stop falling for the same trap again. This is how top scorers build speed and accuracy at the same time. Now let's say you're doing an inference question. You've got it down to two choices and both seem okay, so you're stuck. Instead of flipping a coin, do this. First, reread each one. Then, say out loud, this one is wrong because it assumes X, which the passage never said. This one is better because it reflects Y, which the author implied here. Even if it takes 10 seconds longer at first, this habit sharpens your instincts. Over time, you're going to spot bad answers faster and with more confidence. Bottom line, the LSAT isn't just testing whether you can find the right answer. It's testing whether you can avoid the wrong ones. And you don't need a photographic memory to do that. You just need a checklist. Is it too extreme? Is it half true? Or is it outside the passage? Use it like a scalpel. Eliminate with precision. If you do this consistently, you'll start to feel something rare in reading comp: control. You're not hoping to feel the right answer, you're cutting through the noise like a surgeon, and that's how top scorers win. Let's talk about one of the most common and misunderstood complaints I hear from students all the time. They'll tell me, I just run out of time. At first glance, that sounds like a speed problem, but it's not. It's actually a strategy problem. Because on the LSAT, it's not the slow readers who struggle the most, it's the overthinkers, the perfectionists, the people who need to understand every detail before they move on. If that's you, I've got good news. You don't need to rush. You just need to use your time deliberately. Now, reading comp, you have 35 minutes to complete 4 passages. This breaks down to roughly 9 minutes per passage, with 6 to 8 questions on average per passage. Simple math, right? But here's the part that most students screw up. They spend more than 4 minutes just reading the passage, then they panic and they have to speed run the questions. That's totally backwards. Here is the smarter breakdown I give my students. You want to spend about 3 minutes reading and mapping out the passage, then about 6 minutes answering the questions. In other words, you're front-loading your comprehension by focusing on the structure, then you're crushing the questions because you already know where everything is. Instead of scrambling, you're actually executing. Now, you don't need to become a robot who mindlessly follows the stopwatch. You just need to calibrate your internal sense of timing. So try this. Take a single reading comp passage. Start the timer. Then cap your reading at 3 minutes max. Then you want to answer the questions without rushing, but still staying aware of the time. If you repeat that maybe 4 or 5 times, you'll start to get a feel for what 3 minutes of strategic reading looks like. Now, you can also set your timer to buzz at the 3-minute mark and then keep going. Just note where you were in the passage, and over time, you'll adjust naturally. Now, here are the 3 biggest time killers in reading comp and how to fix each one. The first big one is rereading entire paragraphs. This is what happens when you try to memorize instead of making a map. You want to train yourself to create a skeleton outline as you read. That way, you don't need to reread, you know where to go back to. The second big mistake is getting stuck on a single question. You hit a hard one, and then 3 minutes later, you're still circling around it. Now, if you can't eliminate it down to 2 choices in 60, 90 seconds max, you want to flag it, mark it, move on to come back to it later. Most reading comp questions are independent of each other, meaning that you're not going to lose context. The third big mistake is overanalyzing the answer choices. You might read each one 3 times, talk yourself into a choice, then out of it, then back into that choice again. Now, you want to build the habit of active elimination. If you can eliminate 3 choices with confidence, you're not guessing, you're then down to choosing between 2 seemingly viable options. And that itself is a pretty big win. Now, most students treat timing like it's an internal or inherent personality trait. They'll say to themselves, I'm just a slow reader, or I always run out of time, or I need to build up my stamina. The thing is, timing is a trained behavior, and the more you practice strategic reading and deliberate pacing, the more natural it becomes. You'll start to notice that your reading gets more focused, the questions go faster, and your accuracy stays stable or even improves. And suddenly, reading comp comes to feel manageable and maybe even fun, but let's not get carried away here. Bottom line, you don't need to speed up. You just need to stop wasting time on things that don't truly matter. You don't need every single detail. You just need the overall structure. And you don't need to solve every question in order. Just hit the most important ones first. And you don't need to reread. You just need a map or a skeleton of the passage's structure. Remember that timing is your most precious resource in this section, so you want to use it like a pro. Back when I was studying for the LSAT, I wish someone had told me that you don't need to be a fast reader, you don't need to love reading, and you don't need to even understand every single word. None of that matters as much as you think. So what does matter? Whether you know how to read strategically. Because reading comp is not a vocabulary test. It's not about being well read. And it's definitely not about who can push through the greatest number of passages. It's about how you think while you read. And that's good news because thinking is trainable. So if you're struggling with reading comp, you're not broken. If you've ever thought to yourself, I just blank out when I read, I'm not cut out for this, or I suck at reading comp, let me tell you the truth. You're not bad at reading comp. You were just never taught how to do it the way the LSAT requires. Once you start reading for structure, for argument, for function, everything changes. I've coached thousands of students who hated reading comp. Many were brilliant in logical reasoning, and with the right system, they went from -7 to -2, or from -4 to perfection in just a matter of weeks. Not because they suddenly became passionate about art criticism or ancient religious rituals, but because they stopped treating reading comp like it was a reading quiz, and they started treating it like a game of strategy. That is the shift you want to make. There is no magic bullet here. There's no hack that's going to replace consistent practice and smart systems. But now you've got a real system. Not to just read more carefully, not to just do more passages and hope for the best. You've now got a framework that you can apply to every single reading comp passage starting today. And so, if you've been avoiding reading comp, if you've been dreading it, feeling like it's holding you back, breathe. That ends today. You're not behind. You're just getting started the right way. So let's go.